when I went down to get my phone, I had some drinks in me. So I ended up getting on my knees. Next thing you know, the guy jumped up and came down on my lower back and essentially broke my lower back. Oh yeah, he jumped on my back. And I had to go to the hospital that night. They actually threw me in jail that night too. 2 days later, I couldn't walk. I couldn't do anything. I had to crawl around wherever I was going. I was to the point where I'm like, why did this happen to me? Why am I going through this? God, just kill me. It was a mental battle every day just to get out of bed and make it through the day. When you see people that you love, your family members and your friends die of some horrible disease, and you just go, why couldn't I save them? Why couldn't I save that person? Why couldn't somebody save them? Why couldn't we figure out a way to cure that, to reverse it? And I look at some people, like I had a grandmother who lived to 104, and it was like she was in perfect health, but she had a different way of life.
Mm-hmm.
And there are some people that I came across in my life, and they're 80, 90, 100 years old, and they look 60. And you sit there and you go, what is the secret? What are you guys doing? 10 years I had been living in pain. So now I got literally a couple hours of relief from all pain in my body. I'm going to be 50 in a couple years. And I sit there and I look at myself and I go, these are all the experiences that I've had. And I don't feel like I'm 50 anymore. In fact, I feel like I'm in my 20s.
Today, I have Brian Trampush with me, our guest for our discussion today. I met him at the gym. We started talking about his story, and I found out that had some very, very difficult things that he's overcome, some very significant health challenges that he has had to battle through. So it was so interesting. I wanted to get him on the channel and tell you all about this. Brian, to welcome to the show, JT Jared Taylor.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me, Jared.
Absolutely. So let's jump right in. I remember you were telling me that you had worked in the food industry, and you were in this position that allowed you to see things that most people don't get to see, don't get to know. And you had explained that there were things that you weren't very comfortable with. Can you elaborate on that and kind of help us
Yeah,
understand?
absolutely. This goes back some years in early 2000. There was actually over the past 20 years, there have been three different companies that I worked for, but the very first one that introduced me to, I guess, the food industry or nutrition is I worked for a company called Medline Industries out of Mundelein, Illinois. And I was an outside sales representative for them in Columbus, Ohio. And my territory was basically mid-Ohio, southern Ohio, all the way over to West Virginia. So I covered a lot of rural ground and called on nursing homes, home health dealers, and things like that. We went through extensive training in Mundelein, Illinois. So I spent probably a good 4 months in training. Basically, the best way I could describe it is it was a 2-year nursing program that they basically shoved into a couple months. When you're in that type of industry, you have to understand the products that you're selling because they could ultimately potentially end up killing somebody if they're not put in the right environment or used the correct way. So they were really, really strong on making sure that they brought in the right people to educate us. And their education program was second to none. It was a first class company, and I think when I was there, I believe it's still privately owned. I think that they were doing a couple billion. Now I think it's in the multiple billions.
Oh, wow.
So they're in every hospital, every nursing home. If you go in there, you'll either see a nursing home, a bed, or whatever it might be. They're pretty much selling into those types of accounts. The companies that they redistributed the products for was a Nestle product, and I believe it was a private label for Nestle at that time. I don't remember what it was, but I do remember it being Nestle coming in because it was a Nestle representative that was putting on the class and teaching us about nutraceuticals and how to sell them and why to sell them, et cetera, et cetera. And looking back at it now, it's I was in my 20s. So I didn't really think much about it. I was slinging products into nursing homes, and the goal was to sell as much stuff as I could to make as much money
Right.
as I could for the
Right.
company. And you
You were on
know,
commission?
oh yeah, oh
Of,
yeah,
of
yeah.
course.
I
So
mean,
you're really having to close deals, right?
yeah.
Yeah.
If you didn't close deals, you were out the door. I mean, it was a very cutthroat industry in
Mm.
regards to that. It was, I was working at that time 60, 70 hours a week just to maintain my goals. So when I look at it now, going back at it, it was a lot of other products that we would sell into those. Like there would be like geriatric chairs, geriatric beds, and you would sit there and you would be like, these people are in nursing homes, thinking back on it now, and they need an oversized wheelchair, they need an oversized bed. How did they get to this point in their life?
Yeah.
What brought them to this point where they're now in a nursing home, and then they're basically relying on somebody else to feed them, clean them, and take care of them. And you could tell a lot by the type of account you were walking into as soon as you walked in the door, what it smelled like. Did it smell clean, or did it smell dirty? Did it smell like feces, et cetera, et cetera? And then you could tell a lot by looking at the type of clientele that they had in there. The customers essentially is what they were. And did the customers look healthy? Did they look happy? Were they overweight? Were they underweight? Were they malnourished, et cetera, et cetera? And all these things that I would basically go through in that experience brought me to, if I fast forward now, when I moved out to Arizona in 2004, I started working for an industrial supply company called Granger, who
Hmm.
ironically enough, that was based out of Lake Forest, Illinois. They're a multi-billion dollar company now also. So those types of products that I was selling in the medical supplies kind of overlapped with the medical supply, or medical supplies overlapped with the industrial supplies, because it's just thousands upon thousands upon thousands of products that you're selling into these accounts. I was trained extensively working for that company also, because I did have accounts that I worked with that were hospitals. They were also into like snack foods and things like that, putting into vending machines, et cetera, et cetera. When I was at Granger, I was working with the logistics and manufacturing companies, and the logistics and manufacturing companies were the ones that housed the food for McDonald's, Chipotle, Starbucks, Chick-fil-A, Burger King, all the Mexican fast food restaurants. I mean, you name it, I had basically called on it. And I had also got to see behind the scenes on how they stored the products in freezers, how they shelved the products in their warehouse. And that gave me a really good understanding of how the products would come in and how it would go out. And that's basically how they feed a population of the United States and throughout the world. But this is obviously regional operations that they had. On the flip side, I also had accounts that did bee byproducts like honey companies and other nutraceutical companies like supplement type companies, health food products, things of that nature. And it gave me a completely different dynamic going from one aspect of mass producing to the general population. And then when you go to, like, for example, the bee company that I was calling on was I believe it was in Glendale or Peoria. I think it was Glendale. And it was astounding to me, because I walked into this facility and you get to see the behind the scenes of things that a lot of people don't get to see, how the
Yeah.
products are manufactured and processed. And when I went into this beef facility, it was like, I was like, they took the honeycomb and it was basically all these byproducts that they were getting out of it, bee pollen, and et cetera, et cetera. And I asked them, I said, where are your customers? And they're like, well, our number one customer is in Japan. And I'm sitting there going, an Arizona company that is 2,500 square feet is shipping their products to Japan, and they're making a killing. And when you look at the Asian culture, the Japanese people, it's like you look at them and then they're healthy people. They're thriving. They have all kinds of energy. They're not fat. I mean, I don't think I've seen very many, I shouldn't say fat, obese, or whatever you want to call it, Japanese people, except for maybe a sumo wrestler of some sort. But I believe they're on a different type of
Yeah, they
diet. But
purposely work into,
yeah,
they have to work really hard to get to that point.
exactly. And, then like when I look at the other Poor Brothers potato chips out in Goodyear, they were another customer of mine. And I got introduced to them when I was on a guy's trip in Texas. My buddy was like, you got to try these potato chips. And they're amazing. Well, they were one of my accounts, and I got to call on them. I got to meet Jay and his brother who started the company. And they ended up, you get to walk the facility, see how the products are brought in, manufactured, and made. Snyder of Hanover was another one, which is out there, and you get to see how they put the ingredients on top of, like, for example, the pretzels. It was like a honey. The best time to go there was, in my opinion, the honey mustard day, because you'd walk in there and it would just smell amazing. And you're like, all you want to do is just eat, eat, eat. Um, but it gave me the behind the scenes look at how these products were made.
Uh-huh.
And when I look at the mass production of all these products and how they would logistically put them in trucks and ship them all over the country or regionally, it didn't really mean anything to me. But it was right around that same time that I started getting introduced to a company. It was a MLM company, and it was all about, like, I think it was Monavie or something at that time, which was it was like 17 fruits or 20 some fruits in a bottle, and you drink it, and everybody thought you were crazy for saying, "Hey, drink this," and whatever. But it introduced me into understanding nutrition of an aspect that I never in my wildest dreams would have thought that I would have gotten into. But when you start to get older, you start to realize that what you put into your body is going to be the result of what comes out of your body, garbage in, garbage out.
Yeah.
So a lot of what I started on my journey of fixing my body actually started back then when I started looking into the nutrition aspect. But when I was working at that company, I was able to see things behind the scenes of how they stored the products, how the products were
Mhm.
manufactured, how they were shipped. And looking back on it now, it's just something like, for example, there was a milk dairy that I called on. And that when the very first day that I called on this milk dairy, is one of the largest milk dairies at the time. And it was like they just shoved these cows in and they put them in this merry-go-round thing, and it was all this disgusting things coming from them. They just jab them with needles, and it was antibiotics. And you sit there and they're walking around in their feces, and you sit there, and I was just like, I'll never drink milk again after that experience. And I never did. And when you understand how much growth hormones and et cetera of all the things that they're pumping into the animals that are a byproduct that eventually get into the body, and then you correlate that to what's going on with the kids and how kids are becoming, they go through puberty a lot earlier now, is because they were drinking milk and et cetera, et cetera. I could go into that topic for a long time, but so that being said, it gave me a really good understanding and visual perception of behind the scenes of what a lot of people don't get to see. And I was able to be trained on those procedures and processes and products, which at the time you don't think anything of it. And then moving forward, in 2000 roughly 8, I left that company. It forced me into entrepreneurship, and that's when I really started looking into my business. And around 2010 is essentially, I think we're going to jump into the 2010 aspect. That's when I had my back broken.
Okay, so let's pause right here because there's a lot in this story that you've told. What I think I'm hearing is you worked with these companies. You're selling into uh, these different these different organizations. You had healthcare organizations, then you had food organizations. You have these food, and I guess what I'm starting to wonder is, at first, were you thinking that, all the food, I guess the sounds like you were dealing with, mass quantities of processed foods, and you said a few times that you felt like, "Well, I didn't think of anything of it." Did you just feel like that type of food, that's normal,
Oh
right?
yeah.
That's just food, and,
Yep.
where and plus you were trying to make a living and you were in sales and all of that, but you probably, uh, I'm guessing someone in sales, you have to believe in your product. So you probably, I guess my question is, at what point did you start to question that, hey, you know what? You kind of alluded to it earlier when you're saying you get older, you start to realize what it's important what you put into your body. When did you start to question that, hey, something's not right here?
It wasn't when I was working for those companies. I can
Okay,
tell
so
you
it's
that for sure.
later in life
It was later
when
in
you started
life.
having these health issues. Okay,
Yeah.
let's get to that. You told me that at one time, again, we had this conversation. It's been a few months now, but you told me you were sick, you were overweight, and um, I think you gave me some details at the time. But can you remind me of those details? Like, how sick were you? How overweight were you? And how bad was it?
Absolutely. I'll go back to 2010 as I was
Okay,
going into that aspect of
sure.
my
Uh-huh.
life. I was in Huntington Beach, California, and I was with a friend of mine. We were at a bar, and he was drinking, hit on the bouncer's girlfriend. Bouncer didn't like it, and ended up telling me I had to leave in a very forceful kind of way, to be polite about this. I was bigger back then because I had always lifted weights, and that point I don't know what I was weighing, but I was a big guy, and I always spent a lot of time in the gym. We were escorted out. I was actually told to leave, so I left right away. There were stairs to this place, so I went down the stairs. And as I turned around, wondering what happened to him, because I'm like, "Where's he at?" They told us to leave. There was like three of the bouncers that were just beating him silly, and then they threw him down the stairs. So I pulled out my phone and just started recording it. And when I basically, the bouncer's like, "What are you doing?" I'm like, "You don't see what they're doing to him?" And he knocked the phone out of my hand. When I went down to get my phone, I had some drinks in me, so I ended up getting on my knees. Next thing you know, the guy jumped up and came down on my lower back and essentially broke my lower back, which caused a severe disc bulge in my L5S3, L5S1, L5S1, I believe.
Now, for
And
those of out there that don't know where that is, can you tell me approximately location of a person's back where that L5S3
Yeah, your
is?
lower lumbar area. So
Okay.
if you were to sit down in your tailbone, if you have like an office chair, or even in your car where they have
Mm-hmm.
the lumbar support,
Mm-hmm.
it's essentially around that area. So
Right
if you
there in
go
your lower back,
right in the
right where
lower back,
that kind of like that curve is, right?
yep, yep, just above
And
the
this guy's
tailbone,
jumping
actually.
on your back.
Oh yeah, he jumped on my back, and I had to go to the hospital that night. They actually threw me in jail that night too, as
With a
if I was
broken
the
back.
guilty one. Yeah, with a broken back.
Yeah.
It was, yeah, the corruption. Anyway,
Were you able to get your phone?
I did have my phone, and it was a funny story because that was right around like Facebook was becoming popular, and I was like, I had a little bit of a buzz on me, and I was in the jail cell, and I basically put on Facebook. I said, "I'm being illegally held, against my will. Please call this number," and it was the police number, and they kept getting phone calls from my friends, and they thought it was a joke, but I was actually in there, and nobody would get me out of jail. But my aunt ended up coming and get me at like 5 o'clock in the morning. So that being said, when I got out of there, I couldn't really walk too well. I knew that I was in bad shape. Like my body went basically, um, it was basically out 3 or 4 inches. So
Oh,
if you can
wow.
imagine like my hip
Uh-huh.
being 3 or 4 inches to the left and everything was just out of whack. And then we ended up driving back to Arizona, and two days later, I couldn't walk. I couldn't do anything. I had to crawl around wherever I was going. So I went
So
to St.
basically,
Joseph.
you were partially paralyzed.
Yeah. Yeah. It could have been much worse. Looking at it
Yeah.
now, I could have
Oh
been
my gosh.
paralyzed, and it could have been much worse. I mean, not that it was anything to be great. It wasn't great at all. Trust me. So I ended up going to St. Joseph Hospital, and what happened at that experience, I'll never forget, because it changed my life, I believe, which sent me really on the journey of nutrition and where I ended up. So when I went in there, it was basically they progged me, poked me, injected me with so many things, and I have no idea what, because you just have to, you get in there and it's like sign, sign, sign,
Mhm.
because they have to figure out what's wrong with you. And I'm like, listen, my
Mhm.
back's been broken. They needed to figure out if there was internal bleeding, et
Mhm.
cetera, et cetera. So I was going through MRIs, X-rays. I was a bigger person, so I could barely fit in the MRI. So then they loaded me up with the stuff that knocks you out. I can't remember what it's called,
Anesthesia?
anesthesia, and
Mhm.
all those things. And you're just sitting there going, "Oh, this is horrible." And then I ended up getting out of there, and essentially for the next 9 months, a couple months during that couple months of getting out of the hospital, I found a physical therapy. I was going to other doctors. I talked with surgeons, and I wanted to know what my options were, because I'm sitting there going, I'm in bad shape. Do I get surgery? Do I not get surgery? I didn't really like the idea of being cut open, because back in 2003, I was in a skiing accident where I landed on my shoulder, and I had a level 3 separation in my shoulder. And I had to go under surgery for that. And trust me, being put under is no picnic, especially going through a surgery where they're cutting you open and taking things out and sewing you up. I got 3 titanium screws and a cadaver hamstring in this shoulder, and I didn't want to go through that another surgery again. So after talking to all the doctors, they would be like, yeah, it's about a 60% success rate. And at the same time, my father was going through lower degenerative disc disease, which runs in our family. Taller people know what that is because it's when your disc, the fluid between your discs starts to dissipate over time. If you run a lot or exercise a lot, if you run a lot, that's my dad used to run like 6 miles a day. And that's why it ended up happening to him. So he was looking at options for his back because he was like, well, should I get surgery? It was right around the same time where I was going through my issues with, do I need to get surgery? And every doctor I would talk to was like, 60% rate. And all I heard in my mind was 40% failure rate. And you could end up worse if it's not
If it didn't
successful.
work. Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm sitting there going, well, potentially, there was a guy that I went to college with who had back surgery. And I remember him like, he's 20 years old, maybe. And he's laying with his feet up for like 6 months. And I don't even know if he's even better now to this day, 20 years later, or 30 years later now. But when I sit here and I just have all these experiences and I'm going, so that all these things are going through my mind of negativity. I'm like, there's got to be another way. So a friend of mine had a nerve. It was like a nerve conductive business, and he's just a great guy, Kevin. And so I was like, Kevin, I'm like, you got any advice for me here? He's like, why don't you go to Triad Pain Management? They do like some other therapy type things, and there was a doctor there. They did chiropractic. So essentially, that's what I ended up uh, doing for my recovery. Is I went through a decompression therapy, and that's basically, it was a multifaceted approach. So it took me about 9 months to get through it because I was in really bad shape. Like I was saying, I couldn't
Yeah.
walk. I had nerve damage going down my left leg. It was like bolts of lightning shooting
So,
out my toes.
oh man. So you at that point you kind of said, "Let me try this first." Had
Yeah,
you ruled out surgery altogether yet, or it was just
yeah.
like, "Well, I'll put that on the back burner and I'm going to try this what'd you call it? Decompression surgery
It's
or
decom
therapy?"
Yeah, decompression therapy.
Okay.
And to answer your question, yeah, I didn't rule out surgery altogether, but I said I wanted to take a less invasive way to work on healing my body than basically
Mhm.
going right to the knife.
Mhm.
It's just the way that for some reason, that's
Yeah.
kind of the way that I am after a surgery. You sit there and you go, listen, if there's another way that we can do this, let's try that way and use surgery as a last ditch attempt. Because
Mhm.
if it doesn't work, then, we'll go for the surgery. And I remember going in there, it was like sometimes 2 times a week, sometimes 3 times a week, sometimes once a week, depending on what my schedule was. And I remember that I would go in, they'd lay me on this bed and they'd hook me up to this harness, and it would basically slowly pull my body apart. And then I did that
Did that hurt?
for, it wasn't comfortable because my disc was still out. If you can imagine like a balloon being popped out the side of your disc, that's kind of what it was. So that balloon needed to be put back in the disc, and the
Mhm.
discs were so fused together that it was affecting my nerve, and the
Oh,
nerve shot down my leg, and it
that
could
was
be pain.
causing the lightning bolts in your feet or
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
That's
Um,
crazy.
oh yeah. So we would do the decompression therapy, then they would do ice, then they would do an ultrasound or sonic therapy, which is basically like an ultrasound that they would rub on the area. And it was basically using, at that point, which I believe is a vibration technique, to
Mhm.
heal the body. And we did that. They would use healing tape, like the black tape that you see athletes wear. They would put that on my lower back. They would use biofreeze, chiropractic treatments, and everything had to be done in a slow way, because if you did it too fast, then you can also
Could
injure
m
yourself,
increase the injury or
increase the
cause a
injury.
new injury, cause you more
Exactly.
trouble than you're
Exactly.
healing, right? Make
Exactly.
it
So
worse,
it,
basically.
exactly. So once we got to, after about 3 months of that, they started introducing stretching and strength training for core exercises. And that really was probably one of the best things, because it basically got me a way to think about healing myself, strengthening my core, and understanding that a lot of people's lower back issues come from their midsection. Because if you kind of think of the way that the world works, is there's up, there's down, there's left, there's right, there's cold, there's hot, there's your stomach, and then there's your lower back. So if you have a strong stomach, it will help build your lower back. So you kind of work those out, going coinciding together, and you strengthen your core, you can become much better in regards to your entire posture. Uh,
Yeah.
Now, after going through, if I would fast forward, going through what I've gone through with Kundalini meditation, for example, I understand how important the spine is in having all of that in correct working order. And that's something I can get into later on in our discussion. But essentially, that was 9 months of my life that I chose to do that physical therapy, which
Hmm.
I'm grateful to God. Like, you have no idea, because when I look at how my father ended up, he ended up getting the
Okay.
surgery done, and they basically infused. I wrote it down, but I can't remember where they infuse the disc, the 3, 4, and 5 in your lower
Hmm.
lumbar,
Hmm.
and they put steel rods in there. And once you get that surgery, there's no going back from that. So they basically fused his discs to get together. And once they did that, it was like he was in the medical system, and I just saw his health deteriorate after that, because they put you on all kinds of drugs, essentially pharmaceuticals that
Hmm.
mess your brain up, and you get weak, and it's et cetera, et cetera. And I remember he ended up having a stroke later on, and he was on like statins, a bunch of statins for some reason. And I'm like, my dad's been always healthy. Like, he was always going to the gym, he was always
Yeah.
running. And then I just saw him deteriorate after that, and I'm looking, and then he started going over, and then as he ended up using a walker, and then he tripped, fell on his walker, and hit his head and neck, and it caused another surgery in the upper part of his spine. And then at this point, now he's like 83 years old now, and he can go 10 feet in a walker, and he's just, he's done. And I look at some people, like I had a grandmother who lived to 104, and it was like she was in perfect health, but she had a different way of life.
Hmm.
And there are some people that I came across in my life, and they're 80, 90, 100 years old, and they look 60. And you sit there and you go, what is the secret? What are you guys doing?
Right.
Like,
Right.
I hate to say this, but when I look at the experience of the people that I've seen in the medical industry that have gone through these things, and that the result of, wow, I'm not saying everything. I'm not saying anything. Everything is all bad. I think there are certain circumstances that make it plausible for you to go in that direction if you need to as a last resort. Because I think there are some good things that they've done. But in these instances of what we're talking about in regards to back injuries, the less invasive way that I chose to do it was the best result for me.
Hmm.
And I think that there is technology now that might be a lot different than there was when this happened, which was almost 14 years ago. So when I look at it now, it's just one of those things that my health started to get to a point at that point, because I couldn't do anything. Like, I was avid a gym goer back then. I would always go to the gym. I
Right.
worked out. I would run 6, 7 miles a day. And then when your back gets broken, you can't run because
Yeah.
it's the pounding that you get on the lower back.
So
So,
how were you mentally and emotionally during that time? Did you deal with any kind of depression or anger, or
oh,
what was happening?
absolutely. Yeah, I can remember, there was a time where I just laid in my bed and I cried. I was to the point where I'm like, why did this happen to me? Why
Mm.
am I going through this? God, just kill me. I never had enough balls to take myself out, but um, you know, I, it was a mental battle every day just to get out of bed and make it through the day. But one of the things that I I kind of got to go back to is when I was in college, I sold educational books down south in Mississippi and in Florida for 2 summers to help pay for my college. And one of the things that they taught us there was to take cold showers in the morning. And what that did was it built mental toughness. And the people that I came across in those 2 summers, you can imagine the negativity that you get when you knock on so many people's doors during the day. It's a lot of, hey, get out of here, your guns pulled on you, et cetera, et cetera. They don't want you at their door. They don't want you at their house. They don't want you selling things. You get called a lot of names. And it's a point where it taught me to have very thick skin, and it built a mental toughness in me. But I think even using that as a great experience, I would have to go back to when I was in probably a teenager. And I played baseball, and I was an all star. I played for this all star team, And I had this coach, I'll never forget him, Ken Detweiler. I don't think he's around anymore. And he taught me something, and he drilled it into our heads. And we became, I think we won second place in states that year. I think I was 13 or 14 years old. He taught me about PMA. And I was like, no, it was like PMA, positive mental attitude. No matter what gets thrown at you, you have to have a positive mental attitude about everything that happens to you. And as I get older in life, I understand that, there's a silver lining in everything. If you take the bad, there has to be some good in it. You don't just get thrown into a situation without it having to teach you a lesson. Because if you don't get taught the lesson, you'll keep repeating that situation.
Yeah.
So those two experiences in my life gave me the mental strength. Plus, my dad, my dad and uncles, my family, we came up with tough love. And I was the youngest. I have two older brothers, so I got beat on a lot when I was a kid. Because I was the little kid. And they get picked on. That's the life I went through back then. So it built mental toughness, and I think, maybe God put me in that situation to be the youngest and to go through all these experiences because of where we're at right now today, having this conversation, to use my story to let people know that no matter what you go through, there's going to be a positive outcomes if you just have to make sure that your mind is right. And if your mindset is right, you can work a lot of good things from that. And trust me, I've had a lot of bad things thrown my way.
Yeah.
But going back into that healing aspect of those 9 months, that was right around when social media just started coming out and started getting very popular. And I came across an author, Robert Kiyosaki, and his book, Rich Dad,
Rich
Poor
Dad,
Dad.
Poor Dad. Yeah.
Yeah, was one of the
Jinx.
it was one of the best books that I had read, because it was and I never read a lot of books. I think I read a handful of books before, when I, in college, when I was selling books door to door. But I really started becoming an avid reader during that time when I couldn't do anything else, because I couldn't work. I couldn't go to the gym. And it was basically, I was stuck in my condo. And what do? Well, I read. And that's what I did, is I started reading and reading and reading. And that was one of the first books that I had read. And I was like, what am I going to do with my life at this point? Because I was let go from my industrial supply job 2 years previous, and I had a non-compete that was now over. And I started having old customers contact me. And they asked me what I was doing, because they really liked working with me. So I ended up thinking about it, and I reached out to a lot of my old suppliers, and I ended up starting my industrial supply business, which was personal protective equipment, sanitizers, and disinfectants. And I basically had customers now that I took right into my business. And it wasn't that I was making a lot of money back then. I think I was doing a little over 100,000 a year, which at that time was at a 30% profit rate. Margin. I was making about 30 grand a year, which was enough for a single person to get
To
by.
make it.
Yeah, and I was okay with that. We didn't have the inflation that we have now.
Right.
It would have never worked now. But that being said, I got to a point where I was working part-time jobs while I was doing my business on the side. And in 2012, I had met my ex-wife, and we ended up having a child together. And at that point is I really, really started looking at nutrition. And when I started looking at, because my ex-wife had some bad health issues with an autoimmune disease, and I looked at what she was eating, and I looked at what I was eating. We were both drinking a lot at the time. Her diet consisted of Big Macs, Red Bulls, and daily wine, or nightly wine. Maybe it was daily. Who knows?
So at this point, you made it through. You've healed from your back to a point where you're functional now, right? And you meet this woman, get married, but at this point, you're still kind of eating basically the standard American diet, is what I'm hearing.
Yep.
Right. But your mind is now has been on this healing track of, you had this traumatic thing happen to you, and now you're continuing eating these things, and you meet this woman, and she's got some challenging health concerns. So now it sounds like we're leading into this point where you're starting to look at, well, wait a minute, what are we putting into our bodies. Am I following?
Absolutely. No, that you're 100% right on point there. I was not 100% healed from my back injury, and
Okay, so it's still working on it.
yeah, I was still working on it because at that point, I needed to still make money, and I was
Sure.
going basically working jobs. And when you're working a lot of jobs, you can't really spend that much time healing yourself, and
Right.
you need time to heal your body. There's
Mm-hmm.
nothing else that replaces time other than healing your body than time. So we were eating everything and anything that we could fit
Mm-hmm.
in. I remember I ate a lot of Little Caesars. I ate, Wendy's, McDonald's, anything that we could get in our pie holes, we were eating. And I just remember that I would have these cystic zits and acne that would pop up my back, my neck, and all over my body. And that was my body's way of telling me that, hey, you're eating poison. And then when my ex, she would have this arthritis in her fingers, and her fingers would swell up after she would
Mm.
eat something or drink something, and
Mm-hmm.
she couldn't open a bottle of water. And I'm like, you're 30 some years old. I'm like, you can't even open a bottle of water, let alone use a pair of scissors, et cetera, et cetera. And I said, there's just something wrong here. She also had breast implants. And I looked down that road, and then I found out about breast implant sickness. And that's a thing. And that attacks, you put anything in your body, it can cause autoimmune
Yeah.
issue because your body attacks anything that's foreign when you put something in your body. Like the titanium screws in cadaver hamstring, I'm sure is not good for me because it's basically something foreign that's in my body that my immune system says, hey, there's something that shouldn't be there. So
Mm-hmm.
that wreaks havoc on your immune system also. They didn't tell us this, 20 some years ago, because maybe they knew, maybe they didn't. Reality is we have to deal with it now. So when I start looking at that, and then I look at her diet, it was Big Macs, Red Bull, and I think she smoked back then. And I was like, she would mask with prescription drugs. She would go to the doctor, and the doctor would inject whatever they were injecting into her hand. And she was doing this for so long that the tendons in her hand basically are gone, and her thumb was just kind of hanging there. So I'm like, me being who I am, I'm like, I want to find the root cause of this.
Right.
And if we can find the root cause, then we can actually reverse the effects of the disease. And it's like everybody is so just entrenched in going to the medical system, and they just here, take some drugs. And next thing you know, you're addicted to drugs, and your mind is gone, et cetera, et cetera. It's like, and I've never been that one to like drugs in the first place in regards to the prescription aspect, because when I had my shoulder broken, it was like I had a experience. Like I went through 40 Vicodin in like 4 days when I had my shoulder surgery. And I remember this
A
experience.
lot.
Oh yeah, this experience changed my life for the better. Thank
Mm-hmm.
God. It got to a Friday afternoon, and I just came off. I had no more Vicodin left, and I called the doctor. I said, "Doctor, I'm in a ton of pain." I'm like, and the doctor wasn't there. He's like, "Just take some Tylenol or whatever, and when I get back." And thank God, because that was the point where I started realizing that I was addicted to this stuff. Like my
Oh
body
wow.
was craving it.
Yeah.
And the reality that I went through of not being able to get it back then probably saved my life from being an addict on pain pills. And that's kind of how I look at it, is when I look at my ex and I look at any woman that I've dealt with, or even friends with that have had breast implants, they go through and they use those pain pills afterwards. And then when you start looking at the side effects of what it does to the body, it's not good. And then you have all these women that are having all these issues with mental illness and autoimmune disease and et cetera, et cetera. It's like we've let the pharmaceutical industry basically just poison us with these toxic drugs that are causing even further complications that people aren't even putting two and two together. And I
Mm-hmm.
lived through it multiple experiences, because where we live, there's no shortage of breast implants. And you kind of look at it and you're going, man, there's got to be a better way to treat women. That's a topic for another or story anyway. But my point is that when you're dealing with sickness in regards to my ex and myself, and then it was to the point where we went on vacation. I had started my business, and my business really started taking off in 2015, 2016, and 17. And I remember my daughter was born in 2014, and we went down to Cabo San Lucas. I believe it was 2016, 2017. And I was really, really heavy. We would do the all inclusive, and I would go down there and unwind for 2 weeks and just eat anything I could because the food was really good. And I remember coming back and getting on the scale, and I was 280 pounds. And
Wow.
I just looked at myself. My face was really fat, and I had a double chin. My body was just big, and I couldn't think. I was feeling brain fogged. Excuse me. And my daughter goes, "Daddy," she was learning how to talk. "Daddy, you're fat." And I'm like, "Oh." That was the point that broke me. And it was like my little girl looking at me, and I'm like, I don't want my little girl to be fat. And it was one of those like insecurities that I had of
Sure.
shit. Oh, excuse my language. I'm like, do I have my daughter looking at me this way? Is this going to cause problems for her? So I'm like, I got to do something. And that's when I really kind of started looking at the nutrition aspect, and I stopped eating fast food. I stopped eating processed foods as much as I could at that point.
So that was the
Um,
turning point.
that
The
was the turning
the
point.
pain of, looking at the scale and then having your daughter recognize what you're seeing and then thinking, what's her perception? And I want her to have this perception? And that gave you enough leverage to kind of rethink what you were doing.
Well, absolutely, because at this point I couldn't pick her up because I was still had back pain,
Sure.
and the nerve pain was still there. And when I started looking at it, I'm like, well, my belly is way too big. It's hanging over my pants. It's protruding my pants. I got to get bigger sizes. I would walk, I would get winded, and I couldn't play with my daughter. I didn't have the fatherhood experience that I thought I would have of having a little girl. My daughters, I still haven't been able to teach her how to ride a bike. And when I look at all the things that I missed out on because I couldn't pick her up, I couldn't have a ride on my back, I couldn't do all the things that dads do
Mhm.
in regards to how they play with their kids, especially
Mhm.
my daughter. And it really started eating at me. And I just got to this point where I'm like, I got to do something. I got to figure this out. So I went on this like healing journey essentially. And I started looking into nutrition. And one of the books that I came across was Brain Grain. And it talks about how your carbohydrates, the white sugars, the wheats, and all that get into your body, and it basically causes this gluten reaction to your body. And then I started looking at it further, and it was like, it's glyphosate, it's et cetera, it's pesticides, it's
Yeah.
herbicides, and
Yeah.
essentially we started getting poisoned. And
Mhm.
when I would look at my body after the foods I would eat, I'm like, well, I'm getting cystic zit and acne. And essentially, what I understand is that's essentially your body's way of saying this is a little tumor cancer,
Reaction, yeah.
and you need to get it out. And when you eat certain foods and that's the result, I can walk around and look at somebody's skin and tell them what they're eating. And that's how I've gotten just so good at understanding how people's diets have changed. And they go to fast food, it's like, oh, you ate Wendy's today. Oh, you ate McDonald's today. And it's because if McDonald's French fries, 36 ingredients. In the United States, you go over to Europe, it's 3 ingredients. And then you start looking at the additives of colors, red, greens, blues, and all that. And again, when you talk about the mass production of this stuff in the United States, it's about, well, Fruit Loops. They have to be a certain color because the kids won't eat them if they're not a certain color. Well, in Canada, they're not those certain colors because they don't allow those ingredients in there. And then you look at the how they actually get the red dyes, and it's disgusting. And if people really research this, they started thinking about it, they wouldn't put the stuff in their bodies. Um, I started to get passionate about it because
Yeah.
it's one of those
It's
things
awesome.
where it's I hate what they've done to us in regards to the big corporations and all about driving profitability. And they really have to get back to the human aspect, and when you look at the whole cycle of everything, the pharmaceutical industry to the food industry, I mean, you could throw in the banking and educational, it's all a big cycle. And fortunately, like I said, I got fired from that job at Granger. It was a fortunate thing to me because it set me on the path to be an entrepreneur. And my business was successful for 5 years. And that gave me the freedom to be able to research all these things and to pull myself away from the mainstream employee rat race mindset, like Robert Kiyosaki talks about in
Mm-hmm.
Rich Dad Poor Dad. You're in the rat race essentially. And how do you get out of that rat race, but to become financially free? And that gives you the ability to educate yourself and become smarter on what you're putting in your body. If you want to live longer and you want to have a longevity of a life. When we were growing up, it was like, oh, they're just going to give you a pill and you're going to live forever. Well, the reality is it's partially right, but if you're taking supplements, maybe those pills will help you live longer, the
Mm-hmm.
right supplements. But when you look at how they have basically manipulated us into believing that the medical system is going to save us and the food system is the food pyramid, is just going to be what it is, and it has nothing to do with the optimal health that we should have. And these are my opinions on based off experiences that I've had and a lot of book reading and research that I've done and through actual experiences. But when I was a manufacturer representative, I was a manufacturer representative for 40 janitorial products and 40 food service products. So I got to see a lot of behind the scenes, Shamrock Foods, US Foods, and a lot of restaurants and nursing homes and hospitals alike. And that gave me a really eye opener into regards to how they were, again, feeding people. And when you start to look at how they would take the mass produced foods, and they would basically, oh, this is the less expensive one. And then it's like the top tier ones are the organics, they're grass fed, they're oh, this comes from this ranch here and it's no antibiotics, no hormones, and it's more expensive. Then it was like you're sitting there going, where did we go wrong here? Why do we have a divide between something that's organic versus inorganic? Why? And then now it's like a label thing, and it's basically it's pay to play. Because I got into the food industry, I started private labeling food, and it was like, oh, you have to pay X amount of dollars to get it labeled
To get
organic.
the label. Yeah.
And I'm like, that's all. I just had to need more money. That's it. And I'm like, that just doesn't seem ethical to me.
Right.
So that really bothered me, and I went up against a lot of people. The food industry, when I started getting into that, it was like a lot of things ended up happening, and from my background, I had the education and experience to understand what was happening to us wasn't on the up and up, and I came out against it, and ever since then, my life has been a living hell. Um, so the reality is like, does it pay to be a whistleblower? No, no, because my life has been destroyed because of it. Um, and when you come out against the food industry, the pharmaceutical industry, and then essentially when you're injured, that takes me into my when I was in 2018, I was at the Phoenix Open, the Waste Management Open, and I was with some.
Hold on. I want to hear this story, and I know everyone is going to be blown away because you told me a little bit about this last time. But what you kind of got my mind going when you said when I came out against the food industry. Like if people are wondering, well, what did he do? That brought this attention of these gigantic organizations. We'll call it the food, like the food conglomerate or whatever these organizations were that were sort of taking aim at you. Give us just a couple minutes of what kind of what was this? Were you just being vocal about it, and then they started kind of shutting you down, or what happened?
Yeah, the 2020 censorship is basically what I call it. And people think of 2020 as perfect vision, and I think it happened in 2020 for a reason, because essentially what had happened.
That was basically in conjunction with COVID-19.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. In 2017, a friend of mine that I had grew up with since I was in grade school, we played football together, went to grade school, high school, and college. He ended up getting diagnosed with ALS, and he lived in Chicago. And that was one of the worst things that I had ever seen somebody go through. Basically, being trapped in your body and not being able to move, and the helplessness that I felt from him. It was something that formed an impression in my mind. The second thing that I saw was my uncle John lived in California, died of glioblastoma, the brain cancer. And anybody that gets those two things, they're death sentences. And my mom had breast cancer, my uncle's prostate cancer. So cancer had run in my family predominantly. And when I sit and I look at, again, I want to find out why these things are happening. And that's what I dove down that rabbit hole, and I went and I started looking at why these things are happening. Why is it that the Susan B. Komen breast thing has been going on for years? Why is all the money that's being thrown into cancer research, why haven't they found a cure? Well, the reality is because there's no money in cures. And when you start to understand that everything is intertwined, if you're in the medical system, it's because you're now a customer of theirs. Well, when you start looking at it, if their customers start going away, how do they get customers? I don't know. Or what am I going to put in my mouth? And when you understand, like Monsanto, the company is a huge pesticide company that they basically spray the crops that we get fed. I dated a girl. She lived in Scottsdale. Her father ended up selling his company to Monsanto, and I didn't realize it, but her family was in the farming industry up in Salinas, California, and down in Yuma, Arizona, or across the border there. Huge farming. One of my customers was a carrot farmer out in Buckeye, and I had watermelon. A lot of farming industry in regards to that. So I got to see a lot of these things. But one thing that I started putting two and two together here was the Monsanto was bought out by Bayer, which was a pharmaceutical company. So you have a pharmaceutical company buying out a pesticide company that basically puts the stuff on the food. So it's me connecting the dots. And when I started connecting the dots here, I'm going, we're looking at people that are sick. And then when I was working in the industries that I was working in, the guys that were slinging the chemicals, which essentially disinfectants, is pesticide. And Bayer Monsanto is paying out $1 billion loss settlements because they cause cancer. So then I look at the ALS and where my buddy lived when we lived in Bowling Green, Ohio, where we went to college. A lot of farming in that community, and all the pesticides would run off in the water, and he would always drink the water, and we would always get bottled water. And I don't know if that was what led to it. I think there's probably some other things. But then I had another friend who worked in MTD tractors, and he was always riding on tractors. He ended up getting ALS. So you telling me that there isn't something going on with the chemicals and the poisoning? I mean, you think of Erin Brockovich. She took on the Giant, and you saw what they did to her. I mean, she ended up getting through it. So I started basically becoming vocal about this, and I wanted to figure
You're like
out, listen,
posting on social media, or
yeah, I would
or
post on social media. Like the government's always watching. So you start looking at this, and you start looking at Alexa, and it's not a coincidence that the device in your house listens to everything. And basically our phones, for example, there was an energy device that I had, that I still have, that basically measures the frequency of your body. And it lets you know what is going wrong with your body or what you need to replenish, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm sitting there going, if there's devices out there that can basically take our energy frequency and tell us what's wrong with us. The smartphones that we have, they must be really smartphones, because sometimes you can be sitting there and like, I didn't talk about that. All I thought about it. Next thing I know, I'm getting an ad for it. Again, topic for another discussion. But the reason I made some Facebook posts. And when you start getting involved in certain communities like natural healing doctors, and you understand that, another natural healing doctor was killed or died miraculously or hung, or whatever it was. And you're sitting there going, well, they don't just take these people out for no reason. And the reality is when I started realizing this stuff, that's like, I got censored. And for me, I actually would go out to the mines in Globe and Superior, the power plants down in Gila Bend. I would work with the manufacturers of Honeywell and North Safety, and we would do fit testing for the people for the respirators. So when they came out with all that stuff, I'm like, this isn't right. I'm like, this is completely opposite of what it should be. And then when I started looking at the food aspect of the ingredients in the food, and I wanted to do something different. I wanted to create a product that would be healthy for people. So that's what I did, is I started private labeling a product for that. And that's when things, everything, it was like the perfect storm. It was like I got hit from every side. And I'm not one to back down from really anything. So I just looked at it like, well, if we're going to do this, we're going to do it. We're going to go all in. So I went at, the censorship on the social media platforms, the food industry, I could even get into the telecom industry because I worked for T-Mobile back in the day, and I understand wireless technology and 5G and all that stuff. But when you start to understand on how all this is interconnected, and when you start exposing things publicly, my cousin owns a production company in California. She deals a lot with celebrities, and I tagged her on a post, and she untagged me recently because it's her business and she probably lose a lot of business, but it was me exposing a lot of things that were going on. And when you do things like that, you get censored, and then people start attacking you. And it's like, all I'm doing is trying to save people's lives, because I think everybody just needs to be loved more. And we've gone through so much trauma that everybody's attacking everybody for God knows what. It's just because, oh, you didn't like the color red, you didn't like the color blue, or you, whatever color your skin is. And it was all just illusions that were thrown onto us by what we're watching, what we're reading, what we're listening to, what we're eating, what our pharmaceutical drugs are. So I just started standing up against all of it, because I'm tired of this. I'm tired of living in a world where where everybody looks at each other and says, "Oh, you're that," or "I'm jealous of you for this," or "You do that." And the reality is like, we're all here to get along, to love each other, and to teach each other. And hopefully, if I can take what I've learned and help somebody, at least save one life or at least getting somebody motivated to do something and make a change in their life to better themselves, then I'm good with that. If I could just save one person, then that's all I care about. And I know I already have. And the reality is, I think I can help a lot more people by making them aware of the deception that we've been all subject to, and understanding where we're at as a humanity now. When we come together and we start looking out for people and helping people and educating them and understanding and listening to them, to feel what they have gone through, because I'm not the only person that has gone through this. They took out 60 to 70% small and medium sized businesses by pulling this thing that they pulled in 2020. And all those people had families. I was responsible for 33 families of putting food on their table and shelter over their head. And that went away. And all those people had to go somewhere else and get another job. And some of them ended up they didn't make it. And when you sit and look at the manipulation, it has to stop. And that's why I stood up against it. And I'll continue to fight against it until they take me out, or I live to a ripe old age of 150 or whatever I can make it to, if I'm lucky enough. But the reality of why I did what I did is because I love people. And I think when you see people that you love, your family members and your friends, die of some horrible disease, and you just go, why couldn't I save them? Why couldn't I save that person? Why couldn't somebody save them? Why couldn't we figure out a way to cure that, to reverse it? And you sit there, and it's just that's just how I felt helpless. And I'm sick of feeling helpless. And that's why going through what I've gone through the past 3 years is probably one of the most difficult things I've gone through.
Yeah.
So,
wow. Okay. So then let's go back to, with that as the backdrop, you were getting into the dietary changes, or things that when you realized, hey, you know what, this food that we're eating, or this path that we're on, maybe not leading in the direction that I want to go. And you started making changes. What did that look like? Did you try some specific type of diet? Did you do, what did you start? How did that evolve?
October 31st, 2018, I was wrongfully accused of beating my wife, and
Okay.
I was drinking that night. Now, my daughter was just a baby, and I, that was the point where I stopped drinking. And when I look back at it again, there's a silver lining in everything. When I stopped drinking, my head started getting clear. And when I started understanding that the alcohol intake was causing brain fog, it was causing me to be fat, and I needed to stop. And that was, I was losing weight before then in the nutrition aspect. And I really wanted to get a handle on the alcohol intake that I was putting into my body, because I knew I didn't want to live the rest of my life like that. And I didn't want to show my daughter, I didn't want to be an alcoholic dad or a drunk dad. I wanted to be a sober, present dad for my daughter, to be the best dad I possibly could be. That included me being able to play with her and teach her all the things that I was never taught, that I had to learn through my experiences. So when I started looking at the alcohol intake, I stopped drinking. And then when I stopped drinking, my head
It
got
was cold
clear.
turkey.
Cold turkey. Yeah, when you get wrongly accused in front of a police officer, yeah, no problem. I had no problem quitting. And now since then, I might have like 4 drinks a year, 5 drinks a year, every now and again.
Mhm.
I know that I can control it. I just don't like how it makes me feel. Plus, when I was running my business, I was working so much. I was working 80 hours a week. You have to be constantly on, and I couldn't do work hungover. And when I would get hungover, I would have an anxiety, and then I would want to eat bad food. So once I stopped drinking, I didn't have the anxiety, I didn't have the cravings to eat garbage food, and I would consciously be aware of, again, what I was putting into my eyes, my mouth, my ears were ultimately going to be the result of what was going to come out of me. And I've always been a high producer in anything that I've done. So when I put my mind to it, I set my mind to it, I accomplish that goal. Sometimes it takes a little bit longer, but I never give up. And when I looked at how I was starting to slowly change my life, I started at that point reducing all the garbage food that I was eating. And then it was in 2017. I'm going to go back to 2017 because I was at a Frank Kern event in La Jolla, and I met this Australian mate, just a great guy, just a solid guy. Adrian D'Amico, lives in Wollongong, Australia. Just a human being that had a story that was so heartfelt. He One of his childs didn't make it at a young age, and we talked for a while. And my daughter was just 3 years old, and we connected on that level. But when I looked at this guy, he was just he wasn't very tall. He was maybe 6 foot or so, and he was just so strong, so lean, ripped. His demeanor was calm. He was well thought. He was well spoken. And I just admired him. And I'm sitting there, and when I fast forwarded in 2018 and I stopped drinking, because he didn't drink. And I looked back and I said, I met that guy for a reason. And he put me into some books that I started reading, and it really helped me along my way. And when I look, and one of the things that he said, I'm like, what are you doing? Because he's like, oh, I'm not hungry. I'm not going to eat lunch, or I'm not going to eat breakfast, or I'm not going to. And I'm like, what is wrong with this guy? Who doesn't eat breakfast? Who doesn't eat lunch? I mean, like, let's get food. That's the way I was brought up, is to always eat 3 squares a day. And, you keep throwing it in the pie hole, and you go from there. And I had this come to Jesus moment where he just popped into my head, and I had always followed him on social media after I met him, just because he was just a great guy, and that's what he does now, is social media influence. He's an influencer. And I started remembering what he was telling me, is that he would do the 16, 17-hour fast, and he would
Okay.
watch what he eats.
So he
And
was fasting, and
he
when
was,
he was
yeah,
saying watch what he eats, what was he?
he
How
was
was he
on
eating?
he was on like I think it was a paleo or keto diet, but it
Okay.
was basically high protein fruits and vegetables, no processed foods, no
Hmm.
sugars, no flours.
Hmm.
And essentially, when I started looking at it, I'm like, I got to try that. And that's when I started looking into it. And then I'm like, well, at this point, I'm like, it's very easy not to eat. I'm like, you don't have the money to eat. So let's just figure out what one meal we're going to eat. And at that point, I'll focus on that meal and make sure it's the greatest meal that I can put in my body. It's kind of like you get excited. It's like Christmas morning every day for that one meal. I'm a foodie. I love
Live
food,
it.
and yeah. So I started doing that, and I realized I'm like, I can be very creative with the foods that I eat, the meats that I choose to eat if I choose to eat meat. And there was a friend of mine that helped me over the past 3 years who was a vegetarian, and I really didn't know anything about vegetarians other than a lot of people make fun of them for being a vegetarian. They call them tree huggers or whatever. And I was like, I think that actually, now that I understand it, is fruits and vegetables are used to heal the body. And you look at the phytonutrients and the chlorophyll and all the coloring of the food and how it helps your body. And essentially, if it's from the sun's going to give it that energy or whatever. And it goes into whole um, spiritual aspect of it, if you will, in regards to praying over your food, putting a frequency over your food to what you're putting in your body. And it becomes to an energy thing. But when you start to realize that once you reduce the amount of calories going into your body starts to clean itself out and it starts to heal itself. And this is when I really started to feel my body getting healthier. Is I would I would eat at like 5, 6 o'clock at night, and I would go 20, sometimes 24 hours till I'd eat the next meal. And I realized that my head was getting clearer. My gut was dissipating and going away. I was having more energy. And I was like, there's something to this. I mean, granted, I still had those food cravings, but then I read in a book somewhere, it's like, it's good to feel hungry. I forget who it was. Maybe it was Robin Williams. He was like, hungry and broke. You hit that point in your life, it is a good motivator. And if you think about it from that perspective, I was like, that kind of makes sense, because if I stay hungry, then I'm always going to be able to have that motivation to strive, to create, to do the things that are going to make me better. And having that hungry feeling, I think there's a lot of my friends that I look at and I because they lost their hunger. It's they have the good, nice, cushy job. They're making good money. They have the wife. They have the kids, and then I look at their health and I'm like, your health isn't the greatest. And I don't want to tell them that, but I mean, and maybe it's not as bad as I think it is. But when I see somebody, I'm like, I see what they eat. And, the reality is I look, they're a little overweight. They drink too much. And I love all my friends. I love all my family. I don't feel it's my place to project my views on them. I just wish they would make healthier choices. And they probably look at me like I'm crazy or something. Who knows? But the reality is like I don't have any animosity towards them. I just wish that they would make healthier decisions so that we
Right.
could live all a happier, healthier life.
You care about them.
Yeah,
You want them to be healthy.
yeah. That was probably a long. I tend to talk a lot.
No,
Um,
it's great detail. So you you're getting rid of, you're trying to get out of your diet is the processed foods as much as you can. You are eating whole foods and you're fasting. And so you're kind of calorie restricting and fasting, maybe one or the other or both along at the same time. They're very closely related, but you're doing these things and you're starting to notice these positive benefits. You're losing weight, you have more energy, your brain is clearer, all these wonderful things are happening. And I remember that you were talking about now at this point, was you were going to tell us about this accident that happened at the stadium. What can you talk about that? Because I remember you told me about that briefly in our first conversation, and then that kind of led into some other forms of healing beyond what you did for your back. And so I'm interested in talking about that as well. So here we've got your diet starting to get dialed in. Tell us what happened in this other accident.
in 2018, I was at the Waste Management Open, and I was with three friends. We were at the members area, just I guess it'd be north of the 18th hole. And my friends were in the front row, and I was in the second row. They were leaning back on the stadium seats, and then all of a sudden, the stadium seats collapsed onto my legs, along with them on top of it. So it
Oh
was
man.
yeah, it was about 700 pounds. That basically it started at my thighs and went down, and it pinned my ankles down. And it took them, it seemed like hours, but it was probably about 30 or 45 seconds to get off the stadium seats and pull the actual seats off my legs. And I can tell you that it was an excruciating amount of pain, and it was scary because I couldn't move. And it was basically, it was like at that point, my back popped. And I just sat there, and everybody was like, "Oh, are you okay?" And all the people came down, and I'm like, if it could happen to anybody, it had to happen to me.
Hmm.
And I just remember everybody coming up and putting their 2 cents in. And I just wanted to watch the golf. I just wanted to enjoy myself. I was working a lot, and that was the one event that I go to a year because I love golf. And I love going to that event, and I love watching it. I love spending time with my friends. And now I basically just had all this tragic trauma happen to my body. And I remember sitting there, and they're like, "Do you want to go to the medical tent?" And I'm like, "No, I just want to watch the golf. I paid, I don't know, 350, $400 for this ticket.
So
Just,
they pulled it off of you and you stayed there to watch
yeah,
golf.
yeah." I said, "Just keep bringing the drinks over." At this point, I'm like, that'll take care of the pain. Bad idea, hindsight. Wouldn't do that again. So the reality of what happened after that is I ended up going to a doctor because there was this golf ball size cyst that ended up forming on the inside of my ankle. And your main vein goes down over from your hip all the way down over your shin to the inside of your foot. Well, that is the main vein that basically the cyst, the blood was going down, but it wasn't circulating. So it was a pocket
Oh man.
about that big, and it was affecting the nerve in my foot and in my leg. So I kept going to doctors. I'm like, "What is this?" Nobody could tell me what it was. So I went to an MRI. They're like, "Don't know what it is." Went to another MRI. Don't know what it is. Finally, after 7 weeks of physical therapy, which only made it worse, x-rays, multiple x-rays. I went to surgeons, and they're like, "Oh, we'll just cut it out." I'm like, "Well, what is it?" They're like, "I don't know. We'll just cut it out." I'm like, "You don't know what it is? You're going to cut it out." Okay, next. So then I went back to the first doctor, and I said, "Listen," I said, "I need to talk to a foot specialist." They put me in touch with Brian Allen in Mesa, and he was a foot specialist. He's like, "Listen," he goes, "we'll inject it with something. If we can break it down, we'll do that." He goes, "If that doesn't work," he goes, "we'll send you back for another MRI." And essentially, that last MRI was what they have contrast. And contrast is a heavy metal that they inject you with, and it goes through your entire body. It makes you feel like they put a refrigerator of antifreeze to your body because it makes your body really cold. But it's a way for them to detect in the MRI where the fluid is going, where it stops. So they basically determined that it was a ganglion cyst that had formed. And the doctor said, "Well, it's obviously from the accident because it wasn't there before." And I'm like, "Well, yeah, it wasn't there before. It's definitely from the accident." And at that point, he goes, "Okay." He goes, "We'll inject it again. If nothing happens," he goes, we'll just cut it out." He goes, "You'll be fine." And he goes, "We take cysts out all the time." Okay, great. So we set up a surgery. They cut it out. I think it was in October. I think it was maybe September of 2020, because I had been trying to figure out what this was for 2 years while I was trying to run my business at the same time. And um, after the surgery, they ended up putting me in a boot. And I was on the boot for about 3 months. Couldn't really do anything. Again, 3 months, you're sitting there, and it's like my job, I was behind the computer a lot. I'd spend sometimes 16 hours behind the computer, and I had local customers that I still dealt with out in West Phoenix and throughout the valley. So I had to be in my car and drive, and the reality of doing that, being in a car with a boot on your foot, sitting behind the computer with a boot on your foot, trying to have your body heal itself, it was just very uncomfortable. I would get cramps in my legs. My back was all jacked up from being 2 inches off, hobbling around, and it
Oh
caused
yeah.
my nerve damage in my back to act up again. So I was
Mm.
having back issues, and you get to that point, and again, it was a mental battle to try and stay tough enough to make sure that I was taking care of business because I had to still take care of my family. My wife didn't work, and my daughter was, at that point, 3, 4, 5 years old. And I was missing being a dad for her at that point. So had that surgery. Nothing ended up happening. And then I ended up going to an expo in Las Vegas. A guy I hired, a ex Navy SEAL CIA guy who was about healing his body, and the metaphysical aspect, spiritual aspect that he got into. And there was an event up in Las Vegas. It was a 5D event. So I went up there in search of what everybody on the YouTube was saying, these med beds. And I'm like, well, if they exist, I'm going to find them. As I got there on the first day, I walked around this trade booth area, and I was introduced to a couple different people that were running. One was an MLN company of an energy device, which I spoke about earlier, that takes the frequency of your body, lets you know what it's missing, what it's deficient in, and it was a pain reliever. So I was like, perfect. And another one was a infrared relaxed sauna, and I ended up meeting the owner of that company, which is in Columbus, Ohio, ironically. And I ended up meeting a bunch of other people that I won't get into now, but it was a little far-fetched sci-fi type of stuff. But when I look back at those specific companies, the one was called the Healy device, and this Healy device essentially, they took all my information down, and it was basically able to GPS locate me through my cell phone. And then they went into the app, and it recorded all my vitals of my body, and then they plugged in some program, and then within like a couple minutes, my pain was gone. And I'm like, what is
Wow.
this thing? Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it was a temporary pain relief, but I didn't have to take any drugs or anything like that. It was just, it took away the pain. So then I went down to the infrared relaxed sauna guy, and he was basically claiming that this heals your body. And I started looking at it, and I said, okay, my back was again hurting from driving 5 hours to Las Vegas. So I sat in this thing, and I got out of it, and I'm like, you got to be kidding me. I'm like, I am pain free right now. And you got to understand, from what is it, 10 years, I had been living in pain. So now I got literally a couple hours of relief from all pain in my body. And I'm sitting there going, are these people doing some kind of magic on me, voodoo, whatever it is? I'm like, because it was pretty interesting people. But the reality is, it changed my life. I said, listen, I said, I'm going to go up to my room. I'm going to fall asleep tonight. I'm going to wake up and see how I feel. And I went to bed, and I slept. I got up, and I was in pain, but not nearly as bad as I was. So then I said, I'm going to go back down and do both of these again. But here's what I'm going to do differently. I'm going to have them set up the pain frequency thing, energy device Healy, on me while I'm in the sauna. So that's what I did. So I went in there, and I walked the trade show for the next 2 days completely pain free. I,
Wow.
I, I ended up buying the sauna. I ended up
Mhm.
buying the healing machine. I took it back to my house, and this was 2020. So I had subleased a warehouse space from one of my customers that does the logistics for Chick-fil-A. I've been doing business with them when they were back doing business for McDonald's. So I had their whole shipping area where I had my products. Well, they started basically stating that I needed to wear a mask and use the thermometer on my head. And I'm like, wait a minute, I'm the guy that tells you that you need to wear this. And I'm like, this is totally against everything in regards to OSHA and all the things that I was taught by the manufacturers. And so essentially, they told me to kindly leave the premises. So at that point, I had to get a storage unit for all my products. And then I said, what am I going to do for an office? We're in pandemic. So basically, what I did is I spent $20,000, and I built an office in my backyard. And at that point, I was like, I'm going to teach people how to heal themselves. So that's what got me into that. And then essentially, I was doing that. I was doing some like Zoom calls, sales calls, and helping people sell this Healy device to help them heal their bodies. And right around the same time, that was when my marriage was just in the gutter. My
Oh
business was
no.
essentially failed.
Mhm.
Um, my ex and I, we were at wits end with each other. I didn't want to be in the same room with her, and vice versa. We just couldn't stand each other. And at this point, I'm like, something happened where she ended up basically getting a protective order against me, stating that I was beating her, et cetera, et cetera. And I wasn't doing any of that. It was completely, it was false. And essentially later documents later showed that she perjured herself to the police, but it doesn't matter because the judicial system didn't do a damn thing about it, which is kind of a good thing because my daughter needs a mother. So the reality is, again, like I said, there's silver linings and everything. I was removed from the house and I just built this $20,000 office in my backyard so I could start healing, continuing healing myself and fixing myself. Well, at this point now, I'm like, where am I going to live? Luckily, I had a friend that ended up putting me up, and my buddy, who was my business coach, is a naval officer, former Marine, was coming into town, and that's what he deals with is PTSD and business mindset and things like that. Solid guy, great guy. And he's like, Brian, I'm going to be in town. He goes, I'm meeting with some people up in Scottsdale. Why don't you come up and meet us? So I went up there, and he introduced me to this girl, Brenda, and just a phenomenal individual. She's responsible for the company called Snow. It's some kind of teeth whitening thing. Built it to $100 million
Wow.
with her partner, and her partner and her ended up having some sort of disagreement where they had to split ways. So she was going off and helping people doing with their business. So I went to her and I was in bad shape. I was a wreck. I was a complete mess because of everything that I was going through. I'm like, I just got removed from my house and I was emotionally distraught. I was
Yeah.
financially wrecked. And I remember sitting with her and I told her everything. And I think I was crying at one point. And she goes, you need to speak to my spiritual advisor. And I'm like, you have a spiritual advisor? I'm like, what is that? And she goes, she does like energy healing and whatnot. She goes, you need to book a session with her. So I said, okay. So she gave me her phone number and I booked a session with her. And she goes, well, I'm not available for about 4 months. She goes, I'm booked out 4 months. And I'm sitting to myself, I'm going, who is booked out 4 months in
Yeah.
advance?
Yeah.
And if you ever meet the girl, you understand why. She's just an amazing individual. So I went to this healing session where you basically lay down for 2 hours with her. And it's called Connecting with the Creator. And essentially, what it is where she just does this. She sits in a prayer silence for 2 hours. And what happened to me at that point was like a born again thing, if you will. I was entrenched by what I would call the Holy Spirit, an energy force that I have never felt anything like in my entire life, where it basically just came over me and I was in this ball of energy of amazingness. I don't know how else to describe it. And it was just a lot of emotional baggage that I had been carrying was just being released. Um, and I remember getting out of that session and I was like, I don't know what you did, but thank you. And she ended up reaching out to me a couple weeks later and she's like, Brian, she goes, I think you need to come back and do what I do. So it was a couple months after that, but at this point I was like, there was something about her I was just being attracted to. I was like, I have to figure out what this is. And again, I'm like, I'm curious. So curiosity killed the cat, but I wanted to figure out what was going on here. So I started going to her prayer sessions and she would put on and she would talk about like the prayer of God and the creator and all these things. And her background and her story was just remarkable. I'm like, okay. So I was always open-minded to things. And then as she put on these classes to teach people what she was doing on actually how to connect with the creator.
Hmm.
So I went to her level one session and it was an amazing experience. There was about 20 of us that we were all in this room and we would basically do prayer sessions on everybody of what I call a basically the way that she described it is you're kind of in a car and you're the passenger in the car and God's driving and you're just kind of the passenger kind of looking at everything that's going around and you go into it, you set an intention when you go in, and when you come out you typically have an answer. And these things started happening to me that I had never experienced before in regards to like visual things popping in my head, my body's feeling differently, different sensations, just different types of things. I can't really describe it. It was supernatural in a way. So I stayed in contact with her and went through that again. And she's like, Brian, I'm putting on a level 2. Why don't you come back? And I went back and I did a level 2 with her, and it was like it even progressed further. And now she calls me and I go and I help her put on these for other more of her students. But essentially, what it was very similar to the energy type of healing that I was doing with the healing machine, in regards to um, almost like a different dimension, if you will, of dealing with metaphysical type healing. So if you understand that if we have a certain pain that we're going through, back pain, where does back pain come from? And it could be that there was a trauma that happened to you. If you believe in past lives, maybe a past life. If you believe in maybe a trauma happened to you when you were a kid, so your parents were broke or something, or they abandoned you. This trauma that you may have suppressed kind of sticks with you. For example, like women or even some men that have experienced, I hate to say this, but some sort of sexual abuse or trauma when they were kids, grow up and carry that with them. And it causes things to happen to them that they don't know how to release and heal from. And this is basically a way to connect with your creator and kind of say everything's going to be okay, because in the end we're just filling this body and then we leave this body. We're here to experience it, learn from it, and teach others. And that's kind of how I looked at it. Was I experienced these traumas that were causing these accidents to happen in my life or pains to happen in my life. And so I connected basically everything all together. I started with the fasting, with the diet, with the energy thing, with the sauna. And then I got back into working out, found myself stronger than I've ever been, more physically fit, more mentally aware, mentally sharp, and more connected to my creator. And I think we're all here to figure out, why are we here? And then when you figure out why you're here, it's like everything else just kind of lays it out. That's why when I met you in the sauna that day, I was like, I already knew that we were going to be having this conversation, which was really weird. But it was like, for something, and I get chills whenever I think about these things, because I know that things happen for a reason, and everything that I had to go through brought me to this moment today. And what's going to bring me to everything that happens to me in the future is because why I'm here now is to help other people get through this. Everything that I've gone through is to show people that, number one, bad things can happen to you. You can get through them. We are a lot stronger than we think we are. But number two is to understand that everybody needs to help other people in regards to get through the things that they're going to get through. And that is essentially my why, and why I'm grateful for that conversation that we had in the sauna, is because we did talk about those things. And to add to that, when she would put on these healing sessions, there was another girl that would come in, and she would bring in these Lumerian crystal bowls. So these big healing bowls, and she would make them sing. She would sit there and just do this, I don't know, circular motion on these things, and they would just vibrate. And I'll tell you what, if you're sitting there and they put these things at you, excuse me, there's one for each chakra. So you have your root chakra, your sacral chakra, heart chakra, throat chakra, crown chakra, and etc. And each one of these bowls she would put at your chakra, which is your energy center, which I was in the beginning of our conversation talking about your spinal cord.
Mhm.
So essentially you have your spinal cord, which is the seminal fluid, which gets into the Kundalini meditation. But once your chakras are all aligned, your body connects to its higher self, your God will, or your higher power, whatever you want to call it. And you're able to put that request out, envision it, kind of communicate, if you will, and have that energy come through you. And that's why you see certain people that are able to do certain things that other people can't do. These are my experiences and beliefs based on my experiences. So this is what I have been able to see. And when she would put these singing bowls on me, I would sit there and it would be like a total bliss. Like you're in heaven and you're sitting there going, man, I just wish you could do this for a couple hours. And you would walk out of there and it was like not a care in the world, and you were at peace. And I think when you go through everything that I've gone through, to get to a point in your life to where you feel peace and serenity, when somebody comes up and is, not so nice to you, it kind of, no big deal. And you just kind of go through life, and it's like we're all kind of living our own bubble. And if we can make sure that our bubble is as bright as it possibly can be, then by default we can help other people brighten their bubble. So that's kind of the last thing that I would say in regards to the energy healing aspect of it. There's a lot that I think you can put into this, and we can talk for hours. Obviously, you can tell I'm a talker. I mean, if you saw me out in public, not so much. But when I find somebody that I can trust and has the same mindset and is like you, it makes it very easy to tell my story and trust you in regards to that. You know, there are some bad things that happen to people, but the reality is, what can we do to ensure that we understand them and we're able to have compassion for them, and when they're ready to heal, know that we can help them if they choose to. And I think it's because we all have these experiences, is when you get to a certain point in your life and you've lived, at this point, I'm going to be 50 in a couple years. And I sit there and I look at myself and I go, these are all the experiences that I've had. And I don't feel like I'm 50 anymore. In fact, I feel like I'm in my 20s. And that can be kind of scary, because you're kind of looking at it going, I have more energy. And it's just, again, it's a different way to look at things, but you come with experience. And that experience brings a sense of calmness and peacefulness, because when you're like, I was in California, and I got to, my uncle is dying of pancreatic cancer. I shouldn't say he's dying. He looked like he was doing better, but his brother was there, my dad was there, and I got to sit and have conversations with three of my elders that are in their 80s, and I got to listen to their stories,
Yeah.
and I got to hear some amazing stories. My one uncle was in the Air Force in Vietnam, and he was in some, I would call it intelligence. He would call it something else in regards to whatever. But when he worked out of that, he worked for IBM. And interestingly enough, this is kind of how a coincidence works. Is I asked him. I said, "Hey, did you ever meet Watson? Watson IBM." And he goes, "No, I never met Watson." And then about 10 minutes later, we were sitting at the table, and he goes, "I was running a marathon." And he goes, "I had a heart attack." And he goes, "The doctor that saved me, his name was Watson." And I just sat there and I thought about that. And I'm like,
That's
that's
funny.
pretty interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, but I learned a tremendous amount by listening to others. And especially when you understand, like, you may have different political views or religious views or dietary views or whatever it might be. I think when we understand and we're able to listen to people, to really get a better understanding for what we've all gone through in our own journeys, and we realize that if we can help somebody else get through their journey, because they might not realize that they can get through it, then I think then we're doing our job here.
Yeah.
I'd like to think we are anyway. So that's essentially why it took me the past 3 years to get to where I am today. It
Mhm.
hasn't been an easy journey, and I don't see it being easier moving forward. But I think when anything is easy, is it really worthwhile? There's an old adage, is like, you can sit there and you're like, anything that you've done in your life, if it was easy, did you feel really like accomplished after it? But when it was hard and you got through it, you felt really accomplished.
That's a
And
good
that's kind
point.
of, yeah, that's kind of how I look at, like, what I went through, and what I'm working on right now is to help people that have been through similar situations. And by using the people that I know and the people that I meet to bring everybody together, we can all bring everybody up. Essentially, like, there's a adage that I like to say is like, if we're all on the same ship, when the tide rises, we all rise with the tide.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's something that I think I'm going to strive for and will strive for in the future.
Awesome. Well, Brian, that's quite a story. Your background is incredible. You've gone through some very, very difficult things. And I think one thing that I've learned as I've gotten older is you look around at people and they seem like they have it all together, but everybody has something, and
Oh yeah.
everybody has been gone through some things and maybe has some traumas and difficult challenges, and we might think that nobody understands and nobody has been through what we've been through, but then we find out that that's not true. That people are the people that you think might have it all together sometimes have the most difficult lives or have had. But appreciate you being vulnerable enough to share, some of these things that you've shared. I know, some of those things are things that people just will not talk about. They don't want to talk about it, but then you find out, wow, that happened to that guy, and he seems like a great guy, and whoa, he's dealt with some very difficult things. So thank you for taking the time. I want to switch gears here, and I want to run you through what I call the lightning round. Okay, now this is me asking you questions. I don't want you to overthink it. I just want you to sort of like respond. First thing that comes to your mind. I'm going to ask these questions, try to go fast, and then you just like spit out whatever comes to your mind, and then we'll see where it takes us. Okay, so first question: if you had to eat one food or dish daily for the rest of your life, what would it be?
Steak
And
salad.
oh man, what a great answer! Love that. Okay, if you could have a deep conversation with any historical or fictional character, who would it be?
Tough one. Michelangelo, if he wasn't available, Nikola Tesla.
Okay, what's the most interesting place you've ever visited?
The naval base in Bethesda, Maryland.
What's one book or movie that profoundly changed your perspective?
Oh, we spoke about Rich Dad, Poor Dad, and the other one is Outwitting the Devil,
Okay,
Napoleon Hill.
awesome. Two great books. How has your perspective of the world changed over the years?
Oh wow, that's a tough one. We're constantly evolving. We're constantly changing. If you don't accept change, you'll be left behind. And it's adapting and accepting the fact that everything changes, and do our best to change with it, and understand that if life is like a parachute. It works better when it's open. And that's kind of how I look at things.
Okay, I love that. What's your greatest fear and how do you manage it?
The only fear that I have is failing my daughter at this point. Going through, she's lived through everything that I've lived through. And that's a tough one. I'm going to get choked up here. It's just showing her that never give up, never quit, and always stay positive, no matter what life throws at you.
Yeah, wow. What a great lesson to teach your children, and I think you're doing a great job of it. What's the hardest thing you've ever done in your life?
I've been through some challenges. These past 3 years have been the hardest.
Mhm.
When you have a sanctity of marriage, and you get betrayed, in a way that I was betrayed, and going through everything in the perfect storm of going through a betrayal with the relationship, having a business fail, and going against the societal norm that everybody was, knowing that you were right and people thought you were crazy for doing what you did, and my views on uh, what has happened to our society these past 3 years, navigating through these waters, has been a challenge. But I look at it now and am grateful for the experience, because it's made me a very strong person of who I need to be able to help people moving forward.
Wow. Good, really good thoughts there. And yeah, you really had to deal with some very hard things, but um so good to see how you're coming through it and the passion that you have to help other people. I think that um, being able to help other people, if you have some insight into what their troubles are, if you have some experiences, some deep experiences, right, it's a little bit easier to understand and have empathy and be able to help people. Sorry, now I'm going on here. Let's get to the next question. What life event has shaped you the most?
Wow. I would have to answer the same in regards to what I've gone through. My entire life is essentially shaped who I am, and every experience that I have had, every trauma that I have gone through, every pain that I have felt, every love that I have lost, every family member that I've had to say goodbye to, every friend that I've had to say goodbye to, everything that I've done, every job that I've had has shaped me on and brought me to who I am today. I've not always been this person, and I've had to go through a lot to look at myself in the mirror to realize that I just have to strive to be the best person that I can be for me, number one. I'm sorry, for God, number one, me, number two, and for everybody else, number three.
Okay. Okay. How do you define happiness and have you found it?
Wow, that's a great question. I would have to say happiness is seeing joy in others' faces that you love. Um, for me, I used to find happiness and I used to cook for everybody. And the happiness that I found was when they would say, "Man, this is so good. How did you make this? Oh, I want more." It's seeing the joy in other people when they get lit up. There was one time that during the pandemic, we went to Olive Garden, and I walked in with a full face mask on. I mean, full like I was a fireman face mask, because I wanted to basically put it in people's face of being kind of an ass, and everybody looked at me and stared. And our waitress was just having a bad day. She didn't want to be there. She was working during the pandemic, and I was sitting there, and at that point I still had money, so I left her a huge tip. And I walked out of the rest, and my mother-in-law was upset because the service wasn't good. And I was like, "You don't see her busting her butt on all, she's the only person in this section. She's got 20 tables. Just relax." So I just kind of kept my mouth shut, and I observe everything. So I just sat there and I left her a pretty good tip. I think it was a couple $100 on, like, it was like 4 times what the bill was. And I didn't say anything, put it on the table, and walked out. And all of a sudden, the manager of the restaurant's running out, "Hey, hey, hey!" And "I don't know what you did to my waitress, but she's crying." And I'm just like, "Hmm." And I just sat in the car, and everybody gets out, and she comes out. She rips her mask off. She goes, "I don't care about this damn pandemic," and gives me a big hug. "I don't care about 6 feet. Thank you so much. You have no idea how this helped me. You have no idea what I was going through. God answered my prayers." And I was like, kind of God puts you in situations and kind of sometimes talks to you and says, "Just do this to show people that everybody deserves, that helping hand."
Oh man, what a great spot for us to end on. That's such a wonderful thing. You're a good man, Brian. I appreciate you taking the time to share your background, your story with us, and your heart and the way you view the world. If people want to connect with you or follow you on social media or anything like that, where can they find you?
There's a link tree. I'll shoot over to you. There's a link tree, and it has. I started a YouTube channel, an Instagram channel.
Okay.
I started a GoFundMe because I want to. I'm going to reach out to the people that I know, because my game plan is I figure it'll cost about $20,000. I want to help 50 people. And essentially, I don't know if it'll cost $20,000, but I want to be able to raise about $1.7 million so I can help 50 people that have gone through similar situations, to get them out and to show them how that they can actually make money while taking care of their family. I've been researching a lot of the gurus out there, and when I was making a lot of money, I aligned myself with a lot of business owners that are very wealthy, and I have the knowledge. It's just a matter of bringing the right people together. And once those people are together, then essentially what I'm going to do is grow this thing to help other people become an entrepreneur, become an author, to tell their story, and to show them how to do it and use artificial intelligence and the new technologies that are out there to help them be more efficient so that they can spend more time with their loved ones. So all that information will be in the link tree that
Okay.
I'll give to you, and you can post up on this.
Great. Yeah. Well, if you're interested in that and you're interested in getting in touch with Brian, we'll put that in the description below. And once again, Brian, thank you for joining us today. Appreciate it.
Appreciate it. Thanks, Jared.
Absolutely.